For over 25,000 years, or 35,000 depending on when you start counting, the Jedi Order has brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to their new... Wait, that's the wrong script, sorry. The Jedi Order is a group of about 10,000 at any point in time, group of religious warrior monks who devote their lives to worshipping an all-powerful deity known as the Force, that grants them their power, and in return, they live to serve its will. The Jedi view themselves as galactic peacekeepers, diplomats who aim to end all conflict in the galaxy and preserve all life, only resorting to violence if all other means have already been used up. Unless you're a particularly rowdy bar patron, then it's straight to dismemberment. The Jedi preach mercy, pacifism, working methodically, and kindness. But after 25,000 years, you're gonna have those that just don't make the mark. And I want to figure out who is objectively the worst among them with everything I just said about them in mind. We found out who the worst of the Sith is. Today, we'll find the worst of the Jedi. Without further ado... Okay, I did just say without further ado, but I need some undoing. You need to know beforehand how I'm gonna do this ranking. My personal qualifications for what's required to be the worst of the Jedi is that you have to abide by these rulings. First and namely, you must believe yourself to be a Jedi. If you don't see yourself as a Jedi, I don't think you can be the worst of the Jedi. That seems pretty self-explanatory. Second, like I just said at the start, you just need to violate one of the core tenets of the Jedi. I'm personally just going to exclude worship of the Force, having attachments, and whether or not the rest of the Jedi view you as a Jedi, and I'm really gonna hyper-focus on whether or not your actions are led by being merciful, kind, and methodical. With characters like Ahsoka Tano being rejected by the Jedi Order and not considering herself to be a Jedi, but fully doing everything a Jedi would typically do, Legends Luke being a great Jedi despite having a wife, and Canon Luke having a great track record as a Jedi despite cutting himself off from the Force, I feel like the former qualifications are less important than the latter qualifications, which most of the time just send you straight to the dark side, no question. I'm also just not going to include any Padawans, with a couple exceptions. I know this sounds like a very broad specification, but it just doesn't feel right for me to count off mistakes towards Jedi who are still training under a master. They don't fully understand what it means to be a Jedi yet, so even if they fall far from the path, I can't blame them. This would extend to characters like Maris Brood, Rosh Pennon, and Torben, only knights and masters who should know better from now on. I'm also just gonna outright disqualify any characters who we only know to be Sith or Sith adjacent, but we don't really know anything about their time as a Jedi. This will include characters like Ajunta Pall, Asajj Ventress, Trilla Sundari, Masana Tide, really most of the Inquisitors. Now, with all that in mind, let's see just how many Jedi this could apply to with all of those stipulations. And... you know, that's actually a lot better than I thought it was gonna be. I thought it was gonna be like single digits, and I could just make a video on this, but I have a lot to complain about, and I'm gonna make that all of your problems by discussing why a lot of people you think are gonna be on this list are not actually gonna be on the list. You saw this video was an hour and a half long, you're gonna watch an hour and a half long video. This video is gonna be divided into 3 sections. A list of Jedi people think are the worst but are actually all fine Jedi, a list of Jedi people think are the worst but are actually those who I think should be disqualified from this kind of discussion, and the actual worst 16 Jedi of the Order. Hopefully I haven't turned you all against this video. I think it's really cool. I have a lot to talk about. It's going to be really interesting. Please stay. This video is also going to have a heavy canon lean, as I've read 82% of all of that continuity, and I've only read about 50% of Legends. Most of it on the Legend side of things being books I have not read. So nothing past 11 ABY in that continuity, and I'll probably miss a lot of the prequel and original stuff too. You can yell at me for missing those in the comments. I don't know who the hell Kip Duron is. You're just gonna have to wait another year or two till I figure that out. I need this video out by the start of the year, and you will not take that from me. Now, finally getting into the video. Let's get into that first category, Jedi who people think are bad but are actually fine, which are really just Jedi who popular YouTubers and influencers are lying to you about and have skewed your perception on how they actually are. Really just rolls off the tongue. Anytime I see people talk about the worst of the Jedi, the examples people always give are just strange. Most of the reason why is the fact that a large portion of Star Wars fans get their lore and information from YouTube and personalities rather than the actual source material, which I don't mind, as the books and especially the comics are very expensive, and most fans just don't have that kind of money, dedication, and all of that to spend thousands of hours of their lives reading this stuff. But what a lot of fans don't know is that a lot of Star Wars YouTubers also haven't spent thousands of hours of their lives reading this stuff and are very prone to relying solely on Wikipedia for this information and misinterpreting events.
You're not supposed to have screws in Star Wars. You're not supposed to have, like, brick walls.
Corey's Datapad has a much better video on this topic that actually delves more into it. I highly recommend you all see it. But really all you need to know for this video is that the Panastar alignment never showed up in any book or comic and really only exists in sourcebook mentions. No one actually cares about lightsaber forms and they're hardly mentioned in anything. And Ki-Adi-Mundi is actually a pretty good Jedi. I did a bit of research into this topic and found that when asking people on who they believe the worst Jedi is, Ki-Adi-Mundi appears frequently. More so than you'd think for a character like that. He isn't a character that appears in Star Wars all that often. He only has 11 lines of dialogue across the entire prequel trilogy, so there's gotta be another reason why people have such strong opinions about this tall-headed man. And I believe the reason is Star Wars YouTube. I was able to find 6 unique videos that all call Ki-Adi-Mundi one of the worst of the Jedi. Namely, this one from Greetsleys, with just under 3.5 million views, where he claims Mundi deserved to be shot. If you actually watch this video, you'll find that there's a lot of examples here that don't really make any sense. An issue that's more present in most of these videos, especially the one from Order 77, which is just half an hour of ChatGPT rambling about a bunch of shit that's mostly grabbed from Greetsleys' video.
Commanding clone units like Commander Jet's flame troopers with tactical skill and personal courage, his inability to grasp the evolving political and military threat contributed to the Jedi Council's overall blindness. The Character Encyclopedia makes this connection explicit, noting that his conservatism and difficulty grasping changing circumstances contributed directly to the Council's ultimate defeat.
Quick side note, I actually own this book and decided to check the source they're pulling from, and this quote just does not exist anywhere in the book. It's completely made up. This guy has 37,000 more subscribers than I do and consistently pulls several times more views than I do. I'm glad this is the future of our entertainment. Moving back to the videos actually made by human people, Greetsleys, and most of these other videos all make the same claims that are all false in some way. The first is that Ki-Adi-Mundi doomed Qui-Gon Jinn and helped the rise of the Empire by claiming in The Phantom Menace that the man Qui-Gon fought was not a Sith Lord.
Mundi was the first to deny that the return of the Sith was a possibility.
Now, if you've seen my earlier video on Mundi, the rest of this segment is gonna seem pretty familiar. But no, Mundi is not wrong for assuming that Maul was not a Sith. Really, Qui-Gon is the insane one for assuming off the bat that Maul must be a Sith. Keep in mind that everything Mundi says in The Phantom Menace is true. The Sith were believed to be entirely annihilated 1,000 years before the Battle of Naboo, and the only evidence Qui-Gon provides that he must have saw a Sith was because the man fought with a lightsaber, was force sensitive, and good at fighting. All traits that can be found in plenty of other figures we've seen throughout Star Wars who don't align with the Sith. Namely, fallen Jedi like Taron Malicos or Dagan Gera from the Jedi series. Even though they weren't force sensitive, we've also seen characters like Sergeant Creel or Baron Tagg become more than competent with a lightsaber and take on Luke Skywalker. So the claim that just because he had a lightsaber and knew how to use it that he must be Sith, it's a big stretch. I mean, the Sith had been extinct for 1,000 years. Imagine being told by your coworker that he got assaulted by a man in seashell armor throwing javelins, and thus he must be a member of the Toltecs and is planning on rebuilding the ancient Toltec civilization from the ground up. you'd probably call them insane and rightfully doubt their claims toward the insane Javelin Man's identity. Greasley later comments that denying that Dooku must have been behind the assassination attempt on Padme Amidala's life was also a fault against Mundi, despite the fact this is a pretty justified claim. Dooku was a Jedi Knight up until a few years prior, continuing to retain a public presence of doubting the Jedi and the Republic, but keeping to his Jedi values of mercy and pacifism. It is a big claim to state that Dooku must have been behind the attack with very little evidence to support it, especially when Newt Gunray was a much more likely threat behind the attack, one that even Obi-Wan Kenobi had assumed was behind the bombing later in the film. Later on in the films, he blames Mundi for sending Yoda to Kashyyyk and Obi-Wan to Utapau, two essential battlefields of the war at that point, for the sole reason that later in the film, the two characters weren't able to be on Coruscant to confront Sidious.
In Revenge of the Sith, his insistence that the Council focus on Kashyyyk led to Yoda going away from Coruscant at an incredibly crucial moment, thus dooming the Jedi Order. But why was Ki-Adi-Mundi so catastrophically wrong so often, and what does this have to do with him being a terrible person?
This entire criticism hinges on hindsight, which is what all of these criticisms hinge on. Everything Mundi has done up to this point has been the correct course of action, unless you are aware of things that only the audience is aware of. Similarly, Greasley's brains in the Clone Wars for the same exact arguments, blaming Mundi for suspecting Ahsoka Tano to be behind the Jedi Temple bombing, despite overwhelming evidence against her. Blaming him for not sending aid to Mandalore, a neutral system in the war when the Republic was already fighting on all fronts and losing planets loyal to them, and questioning Yoda's visions he was receiving, visions no other Jedi had ever experienced prior, while Yoda's age appeared to be a much more obvious symptom. Now, obviously, you can explain all of these things away with evidence the audience sees in the show, but the characters in the show don't have that evidence. They're not watching the show. They can only see things through a very narrow lens that they have been allowed, and through that lens, Mundi is proved right every single time. Now, the main example Greasley uses in this video is Ki-Adi-Mundi's so-called sociopathy, seen in the Legends comic Republic issue 62, where he states that he never cared for his family, didn't care that they died, and doesn't believe that Anakin should grieve for Obi-Wan at all, who Anakin believed dead at the time. The only issue with this example is that all of it is a lie. For a bit of context, Anakin and Obi-Wan had fought together during the Battle of Jabim. Obi-Wan was overtaken by an explosion and his body was never found. The Jedi had assumed that he had died, but Anakin didn't feel his death in the Force, and thus believed him to still be alive. Anakin attempted to return to Jabim to search for Obi-Wan, but is stopped by his new master, Ki-Adi-Mundi, who comforted Anakin by telling him that he too didn't believe that his family had died during the Clone Wars, but forced himself to do so that he could continue his job as a Jedi and save lives across the galaxy, rather than obsessing over the death of his family and allowing the front line to falter in his absence. He even tells Anakin outright in this scene that although attachment is forbidden, he did care for his family, which made it so difficult for him to move on. Even though he did let them go, he did care, but he didn't let that control him, highlighting the main difference between Anakin and Ki-Adi-Mundi and why one became a Sith Lord and the other was a Jedi Master. Greasley's completely misinterpreted this scene, and demonizes Mundi for it, which I would blame Greasley's for more if Stupendous Wave did not say the exact same thing.
And it's here where we get the line from the Syrian Jedi Master, one that would stick with Anakin forever, especially when he decided to murder the Jedi. I also found it difficult to accept, but I had to if I was going to stay true to our beliefs. It is this single line that paints a target on Mundi's back. The calloused and cold ways he delivers this information to Anakin shows his psycho-fanatic devotion to the Jedi. It's clear that he at least cared somewhat, as he admitted that he had a difficult time accepting their deaths. But it's how easily he moved on that shows he truly never had any attachment to them in the first place, or at least killed what little he had. Despite everything he went through, their deaths ultimately did not impact Mundi at all. To some in the Jedi, this kind of rigid cementation of his beliefs as a Jedi appear admirable, but to others, psychotic. He had cut his emotions off so completely that he did not care for a single person.
Generation Tech as well parrots the same arguments about Mundi in the films. Again, despite the fact all of those arguments rely on hindsight.
It's settled then. We're gonna take our most powerful Jedi Master and we're gonna send him away from Coruscant to a freaking jungle planet with a bunch of gigantic hairy apes. And so when Chancellor Palpatine reveals himself as the Sith Lord to Anakin Skywalker, who confronts him, well, it's not Mace Windu and Yoda, but Mace Windu and these three scrubs.
Tech also claims that Mundi should have known that May Anasea was a Sith, despite the fact that Tech himself states that he doesn't know if May is a Sith.
When Qui-Gon Jinn talks about a red lightsaber wielding individual trained in the Jedi arts, it's very similar in description to who May is, right? But this brings up an interesting dilemma, because May is clearly working for a master of some kind, a dark side master with a scary helmet and force abilities, plus that red lightsaber should scream Sith. But again, you know, I've hesitated to say that this guy's a Sith because we just don't know.
This doesn't stop Red 5 from using this example by completely fabricating a scene into the Acolyte that never existed, and claims that Mundi not only saw the stranger, but that he knew he was a Sith, a fact we as the audience don't even know is true or not.
Number 7. Ki-Adi-Mundi. This conehead was present when a small group of Jedi, headed by Master Vernestra Rwoh, found out about the dark side user known as Kainir, or the Stranger. He witnessed this warrior using dark side powers and wielding a red lightsaber, yet refused to believe that the Sith were once again a threat to the galaxy.
Now, let's see how Exarch's Ladder also copies these exact same arguments.
Despite Jedi being supposed guardians of peace who only fight when necessary, Ki-Adi-Mundi, with his big-ass double-brained head, decides that using flamethrowers against the clearly sentient Geonosians is the right thing to do.
Okay, maybe that one's completely true, but we're just going to ignore it. Ki-Adi-Mundi obviously is not without flaw. But compared to most other Jedi, especially some of the other Jedi we're gonna get to on this list, he's a saint! It's a shame that so many people see him in such a negative aspect based on all of this false evidence. Another Jedi I see people complaining about is Mace Windu, who by all means is a strange person to consider the worst of the Jedi. He was a great Jedi across the prequel trilogy, and shows himself to be a wonderful Jedi in the books and comics, but anytime people talk about Mace in this context, it always surrounds the concept that Windu created Vader, which is totally missing the point of Anakin's story. I'll break down exactly why Windu had every reason to doubt Anakin later in this video, but to just give you the base idea, Anakin is a Jedi Knight on the Jedi Council solely based on very specific situational exceptions, and instead of being grateful for even being allowed to walk into the Jedi Temple, all he does is demand more and more. Windu has every reason in the galaxy to be skeptical and stern with Anakin, and I cannot reiterate more that the man who willingly chose to betray everything he had ever known for the past half of his life, murdered dozens of Jedi and children, choked out his pregnant wife, and spent the rest of his life on a campaign built on death and suffering, is the man who created Vader. The man who spent his entire life as a Jedi, who was so well respected he became one of the leading 12 figures of the Order, who criticized an ambitious but misguided adult who thought he deserved the galaxy solely for existing, is not responsible for creating Vader. This really goes for most other Jedi who people have claimed in the past are the worst of the Jedi. Obi-Wan caring for Anakin is not responsible for Anakin's later actions taken as a married 22-year-old man with twins on the way. Luminara Unduli being callous with Barriss Offee should not be held responsible for an 18-year-old's terrorism. Luke Skywalker, although definitely responsible for Ben Solo fighting back against him, should not be held responsible for a 23-year-old's choice to murder the rest of the Jedi Order and his choice to support the First Order and help plunge the galaxy into war. Although some of these masters' actions may have influenced the belief of their apprentice, each of these apprentices are adults. These characters are not toddlers who cannot think for themselves and just replicate whatever their guardians do. They have agency. They can think for themselves. They can make choices based on the knowledge that they have. This is especially true when it comes to Anakin Skywalker. Fans are so quick to force judgment on the characters they believe are catalysts of Vader in any way. They claim that Palpatine is fully to blame for what happened, or Obi-Wan for being a poor master, or Mace Windu for being mean to him, or the Tusken Raiders for killing his mother, or Qui-Gon for choosing not to free his mother. It's all under the same assumption that there is some sort of cosmic scale where the amount of good or bad things that happen to Anakin that he likes or dislikes will lead to either galactic peace or galactic devastation inherently, ignoring the fact that Anakin Skywalker was a married man with twins on the way. He is a human being. He can say no to Palpatine. He could recognize that death is a natural part of life that is unavoidable, that although the Republic was highly flawed, a poor democracy is always better than a well-oiled dictatorship prone to enslaving half the galaxy and killing the other half. Anakin has morality. He has a choice, and the choice that he chose is that he was the most important person in the galaxy who deserves everything he wants and was willing to kill millions to make that happen. The same goes for Barriss Offee and her choice to kill innocent lives to make a political point and pin the blame on her friend. It also goes for Ben's choice to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather. I cannot blame their masters for their choices. Not to say that they are fully without blame, that they couldn't have done anything different, but the blame is on the apprentice for what they did. They made that choice willingly without their master's oversight. It is mostly, if not almost entirely, the apprentice's fault. Okay, that was a really long tangent, but now you know why I'm not going to be picking some of the most popular examples. Now that that segment of the video is done, we're just going to get into the actual terrible Jedi examples. Actually talking about what this video is about, we'll get into the impure examples. Going from best to worst, I'll explain why they're a poor example of a Jedi first, and then mention why I think they really don't belong in this discussion. First off, we've got Ulic Qel-Droma, previous winner of the Xamar the Sith Award last video. If you're unfamiliar with Tales of the Jedi, Ulic's whole deal is that he, as a Jedi Knight, created a plan to infiltrate a group of Darksiders by pretending to be one of them and destroying them from the inside. The second he tries this, he immediately falls to the dark side and can't escape. He ended up becoming a fully fledged Sith Lord right after this. Helped to booster the enemy forces, recruited the Mandalorians to the Sith side, led an invasion of Coruscant, and was only able to break out of the dark side's grasp by killing his brother and having the Force itself removed from him. He ended up betraying the Sith only after this and spent the rest of his life in solitude and mournful regret before being shot and killed by a taxi driver. He's just sad, man. I would have taken him off of this list completely, as the dark side serum that had kept him under the dark side's grasp was a factor that really messed with his mind, and he certainly wasn't acting under the idea that he was a Jedi for most of this. But just 4,000 years later, Quinlan Vos attempted this exact same thing, both in canon and in Legends, in two separate and two unique stories, and managed to perform it with only a few major issues, and was easily able to break out of the dark side on his own. Ulic was just completely outplayed by Quinlan here, and just makes him look like a chump. Quinlan wins these. Ulic is staying at the bottom. Barriss Offee is up next, and you probably already know the gist with her. The one and only thing Offee is really known for is her attack on the Jedi Temple, drugging a dock worker with a remote bomb with the intent of creating a terrorist bombing within the Jedi Temple itself, framed as a political attack against the Jedi Order for their extensive participation in the Clone Wars, and as Offee believed, falling from their initial beliefs. During this whole ordeal, she would pin the blame of the bombing on her friend Ahsoka Tano, which ended up including Offee choking out one of her co-conspirators and assaulting Asajj Ventress. Now, you're probably thinking, that all sounds pretty awful and not very Jedi-like. Why are you not including her as one of the worst of the Jedi Order? The main reason why is that I just don't believe she performed any of these actions with the intent of identifying herself as or continuing to work as a Jedi. Although she does use the term "we" to describe both herself and the Jedi Order in her confession, she also clearly does not align herself with her past actions and allegiance to the Jedi. I mean, she bombed the temple. This, combined with the fact that she took no convincing to take up arms against the Jedi in Tales of the Empire, makes it pretty clear that she shed her allegiance long before the bombing occurred. Whatever she is now, even though she continued to display the empathy and compassion seen in the Jedi as her time as an Inquisitor, she isn't a Jedi, and thus, I do not think I can include her in the true list of the worst Jedi. In a similar situation, we have Taron Malicos, a Jedi survivor of Order 66 who crashed on Dathomir, embraced the dark side, conquered the Night Brothers, and seemed to inspire for some sort of galactic domination. Again, pretty bad list of stuff on him, but Malicos definitely did not view himself as a Jedi after surviving the Clone Wars. In what little dialogue Malicos has with Cal Kestis, most of it revolves around Malicos referring to the Jedi as over, an organization that no longer exists, that needs to be moved beyond. Kestis told Malicos that he stood for everything the Jedi were against, and Malicos never denied that. Like Offee, despite being a former Jedi and doing some bad stuff, he doesn't see himself as a Jedi any longer, and grew out of his former views when he crashed into the Red Planet. He did not fear the dark side, as the others... Wait, is this just Revenge of the Sith again? How does this keep happening? I need a new script. Okay, but what if we had Taron Malicos 2? There you'll find our next guest, Dagan Gera, who has the same thing Malicos has going on. A Jedi who was denied the ability to build a Jedi temple on Tanalorr. The rejection drove him to obsession, and after 200 years in hibernation, awakes, embraces the dark side, and on a new goal. Some sort of vague galactic domination angle through Tanalorr and the dark side. I don't really know what's going on. Despite formerly being a Jedi, there's a lot of dialogue that claims the opposite. When Dagan and Cal first meet, Cal identifies himself as a fellow Jedi, but in spite of this, Dagan just starts attacking him right off the bat. Not a great sign for Jedi solidarity. There's also another scene where Dagan says he needs to sever the past, and with that he attacks the Jedi Cal again, with the later line, "The Order is gone, and I am free." It's become abundantly clear that he's not really on the Jedi side. Again, just like all these guys, I don't think he deserves to be on the real list. Same stuff, different guy. The fourth guy in the impure category is the guy I'd know you'd yell at me if I didn't include him in this video, Pong Krell. By far the most despised Jedi of the fandom, protagonist of his own Fuck Pong Krell subreddit, a Sith sympathizer, and a traitor. Pong Krell has become one of the most notable characters of the series for his vocal hatred of the clones who he sees as lesser beings, and his purposeful faulty plans that led hundreds, if not thousands of clones to their death at the beck and call of General Krell. Again, despite all the damage he caused and deaths seen at his hands, he literally says, "I see through the lies of the Jedi. I am no longer naive enough to be a Jedi." Those aren't his guys anymore, man. You can't call him the worst of the Jedi. And finally, just getting it over with, we have the GOAT, Azlin Rell. As I'm sure none of you guys have ever read the High Republic Multimedia Publishing Initiative, to quickly break him down for you all, Azlin Rell was a human Jedi who sought out information on the Sri Karai, better known as the Nameless, a species of animal who consumed the Force, often leading to the Sri Karai consuming Force sensitives, like Jedi, along with it. He had a bit of an issue with this though during the Night of Sorrow, where Azlin would participate in a raid against a terrorist group called the Path of the Closed Fist, long story, and in the middle of the battle would be attacked by a Sri Karai, permanently damaging his mental state, leading him to gouge out his eyes and embrace the dark side. After this, he'd continue research into the Sri Karai and ended up being an important part in the Jedi's quest to bring an end to the Nameless crisis, but in the midst of this, he maybe possibly forced a giant star cruiser to crash into a heavily populated city and killed at least several thousand people for no reason. He's just a silly guy. Can you blame him? Despite the fact the final book in the series, Trials of the Jedi, ends with Azlin Rell escaping Jedi containment and probably ready to kill even more people for fun, Rell isn't going on the main list for the same reason as the other guys. After the end of the Night of Sorrow, he wasn't seeing himself as a Jedi any longer. He's just a guy who kills people now. Finally, we are now done with all of the pre-context. That took as long as some of my longer videos. Finally, now that I've got all of the non-examples out of the way, it is finally time to actually talk about what the damn title says. The 16 worst Jedi in the history of Star Wars, moving from best to worst. Let's get into it. Starting off with number 16, I am so sorry that I had to include this guy. He really does not deserve this slander. But the 16th worst Jedi of the Order is Nahdar Vebb. Vebb himself is really only a bad Jedi for the sole reason of the Jedi Order's choice to promote dozens of Padawan to the rank of Jedi Knight years before they probably should have, in response to the mass casualties seen on Geonosis. Unlike some of the other examples we'll be looking at on this list, Nahdar did, at the very least, pass his trials, but did so without Kit Fisto overseeing it, and possibly hadn't interacted with Fisto much at all ever since Geonosis. Due to all these factors, Vebb really struggled under his brief time as Knight, coming to believe that to win the Clone Wars, the Jedi needed to embrace strong shows of force and striking back against the enemy. He was overly confident in his own strength and abilities, which led him to fall at the hands of General Grievous only a few weeks after being knighted. When I use the term worst of the Jedi, I tend to mean it as an insult, but in Vebb's case, it really isn't his fault. Between inexperience and a galaxy changing faster than he ever could have believed, Vebb wasn't given the proper time to be a true Jedi, and that is what led him to his death. Now for this next guy, I do mean it as an insult, and this guy I am really excited to add because that is where all of my engagement for this video is going to come from, the 15th worst Jedi of the Order, Qui-Gon Jinn. I've heard a lot of hype around this character, and just to be honest with you, I'm not seeing it. I've heard people call Jinn a rebel, the only true Jedi, a man who single-handedly could have prevented the rise of the Sith, and I'm just asking, where are you getting this from? Even Dave Filoni has claimed that Darth Vader wouldn't have happened if Qui-Gon was Anakin's Jedi Master, which, based on my readings of the man, feels all bluster and no substance. If you actually read a lot of the books and comics written about Qui-Gon, he really is no different from most other Jedi, and I'd argue is even worse than most other Jedi, notably for being an asshole to his Padawan in most of his appearances. In one story from the Legends comic Tales, Qui-Gon is overjoyed by being given the opportunity to kill an alien species that had been terrorizing a local community. When Obi-Wan questioned Qui-Gon's actions and asked why Qui-Gon felt it was okay to kill a creature living in its natural environment when the Jedi should strive to protect all life, Qui-Gon just shifted the blame to, well, the Force told me to do it, so it's no fault of mine, and left it at that. Sometime later in another Legends comic, The Last Stand on Ord Mantell, Obi-Wan, following in his master's footsteps, proclaimed that he is glad to kill an alien species that had been terrorizing a local community. Qui-Gon chastised him for being so impudent. So which is it, Qui-Gon? Is murder cool? Or not? Does it just depend if you're the one with the weapon? In that same comic, Qui-Gon uses a mind trick to trick a random civilian and forces him to give up his land speeder. When Obi-Wan asks Qui-Gon why it's okay for the Jedi to use their powers to just steal shit from people, Qui-Gon sarcastically remarks, "Okay man, you get the land speeder next time." Now, I have not read the Jedi Apprentice series, so my thoughts on this next point should be null and void. But I've heard that this sort of treatment towards Obi-Wan only continues through that book series, being nothing but harsh towards him, and chastising him, and just making him feel miserable. Although we don't see that same sort of behavior in the canon continuity, The novel Master and Apprentice makes it seem like it's not too far off, showing that despite Qui-Gon being Obi-Wan's master for around 7 years at that point, the two had still not reconciled their differences and struggled to work together and communicate. Now I know there's a few of you out there that do not consider any non-films to be taken into reasonable evidence. I disagree, and you're gonna hate this video, but Qui-Gon's few appearances in live action haven't been too great for him either. In The Phantom Menace, one of the first things he does is call Jar Jar Binks a dumbass despite only speaking with him for a few seconds. He goes on to gamble the safety of the Queen of Naboo's life on a pod race, claims that the child he had just met to be the prophesized chosen one who will one day save the galaxy, despite the only evidence he has being his high midichlorian count, forever setting Anakin up with the expectations that he'll do great things, and potentially inflating his ego to the issues we see later, and claims that Maul is a Sith Lord despite having very little evidence to support any of this. Despite none of this being as bad as what I've mentioned before, The Phantom Menace really sets Qui-Gon up to be a self-absorbed man who, when confronted with anything, makes a snap decision that he believes is fully correct and is willing to put his reputation and safety on the line for it, and chooses not to do any further investigative work and considering how it will affect others before fully committing to it. This is your GOAT? The perfect representation of what a Jedi should be? Now, to be completely fair, the reason why Qui-Gon is much lower on this list compared to others is the fact that he did, in fact, do a lot of good for the Jedi Order. And although he was never actually a rebel, or a gray Jedi, or a revolutionist like so many people claim, he did deviate from the Council in a couple very minor, but important ways. In the novel The Living Force from the canon continuity, we do see his devotion to serving the will of the Force rather than the will of the Republic, urging the Council to do more work by going outside and fixing what they see, rather than trying to solve all of the galaxy's problems from the center. This ideology is pretty similar to the High Republic concept of a Wayseeker, a Jedi who leaves the structure of the Jedi Order and explores the galaxy to directly follow where the Force leads them, which to me feels more in line with what some of the Jedi preach. His decision in The Phantom Menace to ignore the Republic's ruling on Naboo and go to fight anyways is what the Jedi Council should have supported from the start, ignoring galactic policy and helping where help is needed. Without this, the entire Battle of Naboo would have gone to the Trade Federation, as without the Jedi confronting Maul at the Theed Royal Palace and bringing Anakin along, the Lucre Hulk above the planet never would have been destroyed, the droid army would have placed the Gungan army in camps as they did the people of Naboo, and the assault on the Royal Palace would have been swiftly ended at the blade of Maul's lightsaber. However, in the end, based on how Qui-Gon has always treated Obi-Wan, and his tendency to finalize his opinions and actions before putting proper consideration into what they are first, Qui-Gon is still making it to the worst Jedi list, even if it is at the bottom. Going in 2 for 1 on controversial picks, I'm choosing Sol for the 14th worst Jedi of the Order. By the end of The Acolyte, I don't know how so many people were still viewing this guy as one of the best. Although, with all of the Qui-Gon comparisons he gets, I can understand a bit of how he got there. Despite projecting a calm and happy facade, I'd claim that Sol is the man most responsible for the massacre on Brendok, and that failure would continue to snowball into more throughout his career. Just to set the scene in case you aren't familiar with the Acolyte, a group of 4 Jedi, including Sol, had been investigating a vergence in force on the planet Brendok, a planet that had mysteriously recovered rapidly despite being devastated by the Great Hyperspace Disaster nearly 100 years prior. On the mission, the Jedi would discover that they were not alone, as the planet was inhabited by the Brendok Coven, a group of witches who had been exiled by the Jedi for their use of the dark side. Sol had misinterpreted the relationship 2 children of the witches, May and Osha Anastasia, had with their parents, and believed that they were being abused. Skipping over a bit, Sol would eventually discover that although May was happy with her parents, Osha wanted to be a member of the Jedi Order. Skipping some more, the Jedi were led to believe that Osha and May were a product of the vergence on the planet, leading to Torben, a Padawan who had never left Coruscant before, to believe that abducting the twins would lead to the Jedi returning back to his home. As the Jedi Council had expressly banned the Jedi from contacting the witches again, Sol was instructed to prevent Torben from igniting a conflict with the group. Now here's where things all go wrong for Sol. Torben reaches the Coven and is met with a strong display of force. For some reason, these witches do not seem to enjoy the idea of their children being kidnapped in the night by an organization strongly allied with the government. Now, Sol reaches Torben, but once he does, he rejects the order he's been given, and stands his ground on the side of kidnapping children. The leader of the Coven and mother of the twins, Anastasia, comes out onto the battlefield, does some freaky magic shit, and in a split-second decision, Sol mistakenly believes Anastasia is attempting to murder her own daughter in front of him, and strikes Anastasia down. Soon after, the witches open fire on the Jedi. After a long battle, the Jedi emerge unscathed, with Osha successfully taken into their care, her sister May presumed dead, and dozens of women dead at the hands of the Jedi. Now, the whole point of the Brendok scene is meant to convey the idea that no single person was directly responsible for the deaths on Brendok. Corel weaponizing the witches under the expectation that the Jedi would return set the expectation that violence would occur that night. Torben acted brashly and acted against orders for his own selfish desire to return home. Anastasia acted without proper context, frightening Sol. But really, at the end of the day, I see Sol as the one man with the experience, opportunity, and assigned the job of preventing all of this, and get Torben back to the Jedi. And in spite of his experience, he stuck to his beliefs, and dozens died for it. In that way, he's almost like a mirror image of Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon, with very little information, claimed Anakin Skywalker was the chosen one, and by whatever luck, he was correct. He claimed that Anakin Skywalker would win the pod race and bet their only escape on it, and by whatever luck, he was correct. He claimed that Maul was a Sith Lord who heralded their return to the galaxy, and he was correct. Sol did exactly the same. With very little information, he claimed Osha and May were trapped and needed an escape. They weren't. He claimed that Osha was destined to become a Jedi. She wasn't. He believed that if he just stood his ground and made his intentions clear, the witches would stand down and provide him his future apprentice. He was wrong. It is only based on luck that Qui-Gon is remembered fondly, while Sol became responsible for a massacre. But at the very least, Sol survived, and he was pretty young at the time. How does he choose to atone for his actions? In short, he didn't. Indara convinces him not to inform the Council of his actions, and cover up the entire event under the pretense that if he did tell the truth, Osha would be taken away from him, and she would lose her dream of becoming a Jedi along with her entire family. So Sol spent most of Osha's life lying to her about how her family died. He tries to train her to become a Jedi, but she was just too old to be trained. Her emotions prevented her from adhering to the Jedi Code, and thus she left the Order. And even then, he still did not tell her how her family really died. He turned her against them, and I've really got to stop doing this. Osha leaving the Order seemed to really affect how he trained his next Padawan, Jeki Lon, as well, with Lon stating in the book The Crystal Crown that in spite of it being very common practice amongst the Jedi, Jeki was 19 years old, and Sol had never allowed her to leave Coruscant and join him on a mission. Really, it's kind of a miracle seeing how well she fought against the stranger on Kofar, with the knowledge that she had only been on missions for a year at that point. Her skills were almost entirely gained solely from training at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. In the end, Sol's failures had fully caught up with him when May began murdering Jedi involved in the massacre on Brendok. His legacy left nearly a dozen Jedi dead, and once the secret that Sol was the one to murder Anastasia was finally leaked, his own death as well. The combination of Sol both forming a close bond with a child he had only met once and believing that she needed to be rescued, leaving dozens dead, and his inability to properly atone for those actions, leaving even more dead, and the potential of a new Sith added to the Jedi's rival faction, I believe Sol does belong on this list. What keeps him on the lower side is that everything he did was with the best of intentions, and there are realities out there where he did pull a Qui-Gon, and all of his guesses were correct. and all of his actions led to a better future, but he was wrong. And for that, I can't call him a good Jedi. Okay, wow, that was a long one, and we're already past the half-an-hour mark. Let's see if I can just get a shorter one to talk about. God damn it, it's another one. Okay, so number 13 and 12 are Vrook, Lamar, and Atris. Two Jedi responsible for the same thing, ranked only differently based on how much one talks over the other. But they're both from the Old Republic, so I've got to give another long-winded explanation as to who exactly they are for all of you unfamiliar with that era of time. I don't mind talking about it, I just hope you've got me on a second monitor or something, or doing something more productive with your time. Our hours on this earth are limited, and I've still got another 10 Jedi to talk about after this. God! Alright, so the Acolyte was like 100 years before the films. But for these two, we've got to go all the way back to 4,000 years before the films. The Republic and the Jedi are still around, still doing well, although recovering from a war against the Sith just a few decades prior. Now, out in the Outer Rim, the Mandalorians have chosen that they didn't hear a bell, and have restarted their galactic conquest that first began with that war I mentioned before. This creates a split in the Jedi Order. On one hand, you've got the Revan Gist, a man creating a small army of young Jedi who are itching to strike back against the Mandalorians and save the planets the army is raiding. While on the other side, you've got the Jedi Council, an organization more willing to rebuild and see how things play out with the Mandalorians before taking action. The Council has banned the Revan Gist from taking action against the Mandalorians for months, until the Revan Gist, now under the new name of Revan, was able to find a loophole in the system, and himself and his followers joined the war effort by signing up as volunteer civilian healers in the military. Revan exploited the hell out of this loophole and managed to find a large amount of control over the entire Republic army, eventually defeating the Mandalorians and saving the galaxy. If only for a brief moment, as Revan, due to circumstances that would take way too long to get into, turned against the Republic and used his followers to invade the government they had just fought for. Now you're probably thinking, why is all of this important, Sub-Doge? I got stuff to do. Well, the main reason for getting into this is that both Atris and Lamar were members of that Jedi Council who restricted the Jedi's ability to fight against the Mandalorians. Similar to the plot of The Phantom Menace, the Mandalorians were clear and obvious invaders, killing anyone in their way and forcing their rule through might. They were clearly the issue, and needed Jedi support to save lives and restrict their movement, but the Council was hesitant to take action. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm choosing to single out Atris and Lamar, and why I haven't mentioned other Jedi who chose inaction over joining the fight, like the prequel-era Council did over Naboo. Well, first off, the main reason why I believe this Jedi Council can be included while the prequel-era Council cannot is the fact that the Jedi Council in the prequels only had hours after learning about the Trade Federation invasion to the point where the war was already over. They didn't really have the option to consider anything as the conflict was over as quickly as it had begun. The Old Republic Council, on the other hand, had months of watching this conflict unfold, and months to discuss a plan of action and choose nothing over and over again. Even when Revan was out fighting the war, the Jedi still chose to stay behind until Revan's return, and they had no other choice but to stand up. The reason why I'm singling out Atris and Lamar, though, is the fact that a former soldier in Revan's army, Mitra Surik, had the opportunity to ask 3 members of the Council years after the war's end about their thoughts on the Jedi's choice to stay out of the Mandalorian Wars. Council member Ulic Qel recognized in hindsight that going to war was the correct choice and regrets his actions to stay behind. Atris and Lamar, however, refused to accept that fact and believe that Revan's rise to power is solely due to the fact that he chose to participate in the war. Ignoring the fact that Revan's turn to the dark side had nothing to do with the Mandalorian Wars themselves, as Lamar and Atris would have no idea about that, it's important to note that Revan never would have been anywhere near a leadership position had the Jedi chosen to join the war earlier. There would be no reason for a Revan Gist to exist in that position. Even when both history and Zez-Kai agree that the Jedi's inaction led to the deaths of millions, Lamar and Atris both did not. And for being unable to even participate in that discussion without losing their temper, I'm putting them here as some of the worst Jedi the Jedi Order had to offer. Okay, we've got to move all the way forward to the Skywalker era again, but we'll have to return back to the Old Republic later in this video. We won't be moving past obscure nobodies barely any fan has ever heard of though, as next up, we got the man, the myth, the legend, Klefan Opus. Yeah, we don't have a picture of this guy. He was a male Eskagian though, which we also don't have a picture of. We do have some female Eskagians though, so if you can just imagine like a slightly more masculine version of this, that's kinda him. Maybe. The important thing to know though is that he was a Jedi of the Order during the Clone Wars, and this guy is just like Master Soul but turned up to 11. He only ever appeared in one book, and it's not one a lot of people are familiar with. So if you've never read Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade, let me break it down real quick as to why this guy is here. A few decades before the Clone Wars, Klefan was a Knight of the Order training his Padawan, Sember Vey. Vey had become close friends with a fellow Padawan, Iskat Akaris. Feyre had struggled during her time in the Order, mainly with her inability to control her own emotions. This struggle reached its terminus during her Jedi trials, where Akaris was confronted with the Trial of Spirit, a test requiring the Jedi Padawan to confront the darkness within themselves and defeat it. Akaris was unable to do this, and in shame for her failure, left the Jedi Order and returned to her homeworld, overcome with depression. On her homeworld, at the age of only 16, she would give birth to a girl named Iskat, and soon after would discover that her child, like her mother, was sensitive to the Force. Knowing this, she would call upon her friend Sember Vey and her master Klefan Opus to take her child into the Order. When visiting Akaris' home planet of Bekori to take Iskat into the Order, the two Jedi would be made aware that in spite of this, the two took Iskat and left Feyre to her fate. 20 years later, Opus would later say that it was simply destiny and the will of the Force that the sort of calloused and cold view on the Force in the Jedi Code would continue throughout his time in the Order. When Iskat became an apprentice to Sember Vey, the two would be sent to the Battle of Geonosis, where Vey would be shot down and killed. While Iskat ran to her side, Opus would grab her away and rush her back to a ship. Although fine up to this point, Opus would immediately begin talking to Iskat and claim that Iskat simply should not feel sad for the death of the figure most Padawans see as a parent, and should instead be celebrating that she died, and chastise her for being upset, as it was against the Jedi Code to be. When Sember Vey was dying, she mentioned the name of Iskat's mother, a name that Iskat did not know and would ask Opus about, a name Opus chose to immediately cover up and encouraged Iskat to not look into her. When Iskat would go to Opus for comfort and to talk about their shared loss they both had over the death of Iskat's mother and Opus's former apprentice, Opus simply refused to discuss her death and encouraged Iskat to instead meditate to ignore her loss. This sort of perfectionist view on the Jedi Code and inhuman way Opus had acted towards Iskat would eventually lead her to the dark side and to join the ranks of the Inquisitorius, and I wouldn't be surprised if Iskat wasn't the only one to go down that path because of the way Opus had chosen to represent the Jedi Order. After the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, Iskat would meet Opus one last time, and when confronted about his choices made as a Jedi and the way he treated Iskat, he would continue to stand by his beliefs, and chose instead to criticize Iskat for falling to the dark side, rather than showing any sort of recognition for what led her to that position, even when being told examples right to his face. He criticized her new empire. No, that's just Revenge of the Sith again. God damn. I know this may seem counterintuitive with the way I've described Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker at the start of this video, but Opus seems like a special case to me. Compared to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who acted in the most human way towards his apprentice that unfortunately led him to the dark side by empathizing with Anakin's struggle, Opus had worked with the issues, refused to empathize at all, going against the Jedi as a concept and uniquely setting him apart as wrong. When you compare Soul's final words to the Padawan he failed, it's okay. To Opus's final words to Iskat, "Don't make me kill you." No, that's still Revenge of the Sith. I don't want to fight you, but I will. The distinction between the two is made clear. Sol was a Jedi who always had the best intentions at heart, who made a gamble, lost, and paid for it. Klefan Opus was a Jedi who willingly made the wrong choice from the start due to a strict and merciless view on the Jedi Code, who willingly chose to be indifferent and unfeeling to the plights of those around him with the hope of doing what's best for the people. To quote Anakin Skywalker, who although isn't the best example of a Jedi here as he himself is just about to show up in a bit, he had a pretty accurate thing to say here. Attachment is forbidden, but compassion is central to a Jedi's life. So you might say that we are encouraged to love. In Opus's quest to make sure he never went against Anakin's former ruling, he completely disregarded the second. And because of that, he drove those around him to the dark side and represented the Jedi as an almost robotic group. And because of that, he's making it on the list of the worst Jedi of all time. Okay, that took a long time to break down. Let's actually do a quick one for once. The one I'm considering the 10th worst Jedi of the Order is Jorus C'baoth. Check it, just one you. I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I'm only up to Dark Empire and the Legends post-Return of the Jedi timeline, so I have not read Outbound Flight yet. Now this does go directly against what I said at the start about not including Jedi from media I haven't consumed, but just from word of mouth, I think I'd be damned if I didn't include this guy. All I really know is that Jorus was a Jedi Knight who decided to proclaim himself a Jedi Master in spite of that being the job of the Jedi Council, and he just generally sounds like an asshole who's completely full of himself. If he's anything like his clone, it doesn't look great for him, but if he isn't, my fault, my man. But I think the people here are gonna agree with me. Right? Huh? You trust me, right? You don't? Why? Well, don't lecture me, Obi-Wan. God, it's just the same page of the same script again and again and again. How the hell did all of this get written in here? Next up, 9th worst of the Jedi. You know how this is going. It's Iskat Akaris. Just by association, we already talked about Iskat a lot when talking about Klefan Opus, but unfortunately, she's got a little bit more against her than Opus did. Iskat Akaris was a Jedi who ended up having a path pretty close to Nahdar Vebb's, but considerably worse. This all starts off from the beginning, which you've already heard about with her mother's failings in the Jedi trial and giving up her child to the Jedi Order. Sember Vey would end up promising that once Iskat was of age, Vey would take her on as her own apprentice. Because of this, Iskat really struggled after becoming a Padawan due to the fact that her master was chosen not because the two shared a connection through the Force, but because Vey had made a promise to her dead mother. Sember Vey and Iskat Akaris ended up being completely different people who did not work well together. Vey was a woman who belonged in the library. She dedicated her life to studying text and researching whatever she found interesting. Iskat, on the other hand, was a woman who wanted to escape from the confines of the Jedi Temple, going out into the galaxy and exploring, like the Wayseekers once did decades before her. Iskat wouldn't be able to lead this life she wanted being chained to Vey, and because of this, she would begin to feel disconnected from the Jedi Order and her master. The first time she really got the sort of adventure that she wanted was at the Battle of Geonosis, an event that would begin to reveal to her the dark side that had built up within her, and she felt no more at home than when she had the opportunity to cut down Geonosians in their tracks, becoming so engrossed in the fighting that she would become disassociated with everything else. After the battle, the death of her master and being knighted, Iskat would be sent to fight in the Clone Wars, being sent to the separatist world of Thule to quietly disable a droid factory. After the death of her squad leader, Iskat would take matters into her own hands and finish the mission, detonating the droid factory instead of disabling it and escaping. Later she would discover that by openly attacking a droid factory, the rest around the galaxy would be more heavily defended. But most importantly, a dozen civilians were killed in the attack. The important thing to note here is that when confronted with this information, Iskat admitted to being unaware that there were any civilians on the premise, but felt no regret for their deaths, believing that as they made weapons for the opposing side, they deserved to die, and called it a victory. To make this a lot less obvious, when she was demoted to Youngling caretaker for this event, she absent-mindedly stopped reciting the Jedi code to the Younglings and started to recite the Sith code. Unsurprisingly, a few years later when confronted by the Grand Inquisitor, she willingly joined the Inquisitorius in their quest to slay as many Jedi as they could find, and was dubbed 13th Sister. I feel like there's an argument to make here that Iskat deserves better than this placement on the list. She, like Nahdar, considerably more than he was a victim of circumstance. She didn't have a choice to be born to a mother with a history with the Jedi, nor a choice to be matched with a master who did not feel the same way about the galaxy that she did, nor a choice to be drafted into the largest war in galactic history and be forced to confront the horrors of large-scale war, nor a choice to have no one to comfort her through the horrors except for a man who had chosen not to care for her to avoid attachments. But it was still her belief that the Separatists deserved death because of the actions of their leader, that the mission mattered more than those it would affect, and that the Jedi were deserving of genocide. Iskat Akaris was a tragic character. Her fate not one she deserved, nor one the Jedi should have given her, but it was still the fate she followed through with when she picked up the Red Blade. Unsurprisingly, the 8th worst of the Jedi Order is none other than the royal-born, traitor to the Republic, Dooku. You all know Dooku, you've seen him, you like him, you love him, but you all know this from his time as Sith Lord. This is the worst of the Jedi, not the worst of the Sith. I had some pretty mean words to say about Dooku in that last video about the worst of the Sith. I don't really want to think about him anymore. I'm putting him there. I'm not going to think about him. Don't make me think about him. I'm never talking about Dooku ever again, which I'm sure you'd all love to watch after this video is over. My videos are still in the trench and I am begging you for more. But most of the reasons why I don't like Dooku much as a character originate from his betrayal as a Sith and the connotations that come with that. Strictly speaking, from just a Jedi perspective, he's not that bad. That's from a personal perspective though, not from a Jedi perspective. From a Jedi perspective, Dooku fucking sucks. In the canon continuity, we've gotten a few sporadic appearances of Jedi Dooku, and none of them have made him look that good. Most of them happen to originate from when Dooku was training Qui-Gon, who is somehow not as fucked up as he should have been, keeping in mind all Dooku has subjected him to. The first example is from the novel Master and Apprentice, where Qui-Gon remembers one of his earliest memories with his former master. In this memory, he recalls being sent to the planet Stygian Prime to discover and take down the bounty hunter Shen the Mole. In the middle of the search, however, Qui-Gon was captured, and in a rage, Dooku had tracked down Mole, used the Force to choke her out, and tortured her with Force lightning long after she had been defeated. The next example is from Tales of the Jedi, famous for its portrayal of Dooku as a guy you probably wouldn't trust your kid with, and continuing a concerning trend of Dooku starting off with the right mindset, but taking things too far. We see him earlier in his life. Earlier meaning like his 30s. Dooku died at 83 and was trying to overthrow the Republic at that age. He's been doing a lot for a while. Anyway, in this short episode, we get another glimpse at Dooku's aggressive form of justice as he sees it. When confronted with a planet destroyed by their leaders who did not care for them and sold off their resources to the highest bidder, forced to kidnap the son of their senator to try and give themselves leverage to make demands for basic living, and then confronted by the senator and his private army arriving on the planet to retrieve his son, Dooku was driven into a blind rage, seamlessly taking down the senator's army and attempting to murder the defeated and weaponless man himself to, quote, eradicate corruption. In spite of the fact that Dooku's allegiance was to the Republic, to democracy, god damn it, man. Sometime after this, the recent comic Jedi Knights provided Dooku with what may be his worst moment as a Jedi, changing up his lack of control in an otherwise justified situation to premeditated aggression. On a mission to the planet Sansara, Dooku and Qui-Gon were asked to oversee peaceful negotiations between a group of peaceful Sansaran people and an outlaw raider group that had been attacking the major settlements. Dooku chose to let Qui-Gon oversee the mission and asked him to come up with a plan. The plan Qui-Gon chose was simple: walk into the Outlaws' base camp and demand peaceful negotiations. The plan completely failed. After attempting to mind trick their leader, the Outlaws fought back with force, and Qui-Gon was forced to kill several of them. Later, when discussing the events of the day, Dooku revealed to Qui-Gon that he knew Qui-Gon's plan would fail. He knew that Qui-Gon would have to kill all of those people, and the reason why Dooku allowed Qui-Gon to go ahead with it was because he wanted him to kill all of those people. He wanted him to suffer. because he wanted him to learn that the Jedi Code would not help him in the end, and the only thing Qui-Gon could do was rely on his anger. This is word for word the kind of speech you expect to hear Palpatine teaching Anakin. And keep in mind, Dooku isn't even aware of the Sith being around for another 30-something years. This is just regular, uninfluenced Dooku speaking off the cuff here. This is a Jedi Master of the Order's personal thoughts on how the world should work. This man was apprenticed to Yoda and experienced enough to possibly petition for a position on the Council. They're just letting this guy handle galactic peace. After this whole speech, Dooku and Qui-Gon returned to the outlaw camp and tried the exact same thing. Except this time, Qui-Gon followed Dooku's word and offered to duel instead of negotiate. The outlaws agreed, under the one condition that Qui-Gon not use the Force. In spite of this, Qui-Gon ended up fucking up and using the Force anyway, angering the outlaws, leading to Dooku murdering every single living being in the building. Which probably wasn't necessary, but he ended up doing it anyway. Between all of these examples and the obvious fact that he did turn out to be a Sith later in his life, makes it pretty easy to see why he's on this list. Despite claiming to be a Jedi, throughout his tenure as one, he would continue to struggle with his faith in the light and naturally descended to the dark side while seemingly carrying out his quote-unquote peacekeeper duties. Naturally, moving from one Sidious apprentice to the other, we've got Mr. Star Wars himself, Anakin Skywalker. I don't think he needs much introduction. You already knew this guy was gonna be on here. Oftentimes I hear online people claiming that Windu and the Jedi Council were holding Anakin back, and by all measure the sheer power and skill Anakin had proven himself to have by Revenge of the Sith and being the prophesized chosen one should have guaranteed that Anakin be promoted to a Jedi Master. That it was Windu's ego or a personal grudge or some sort of dogmatic ruling that forced Anakin back and to inevitably become Vader. But you've got to realize that being a Jedi Master means you've got to be a good Jedi. Despite some small scattered beliefs in the fandom, getting a spot on the Jedi Council is not a measure of how good you are at killing people, nor is it a measure of your midichlorian count or your ability to pull from the pool of the Force. To become a Jedi Master and, at the peak, a Jedi Council member, you need to be the proper representation of the Jedi ideal, demonstrating what all Jedi should strive to be, presumably after years of experience. The core tenets of the Jedi Order preach that Jedi are merciful, the Jedi are kind, they are rational, they do not seek adventure, they do not draw upon the dark side, they do not form attachments, they destroy the Sith, not join them. That's still the wrong script. Anyway, you can probably tell and are probably already very familiar with, Anakin Skywalker is the antithesis of the Jedi. He was only given his position on the council because the leader of the galactic government demanded it, and not because of any reasonable Jedi believing it. Headstrong, egotistical, xenophobic in the Legends continuity, although not transphobic, and did actually coin the term transgender in the canon continuity for your fun fact of the day. He's not all bad, he is an ally, but he is aggressive and has a temper that leaves others dead in his wake. I'd bring up examples of him to prove my point, but like, do you really need it? The whole prequel trilogy is about why he was a bad Jedi and not meant for that sort of a position. The Clone Wars, although blunted, still shows how bad Anakin had gotten in his final years as a Jedi, and you can probably guess how he ends up acting in all the EU or canon media you haven't read. Undoubtedly, Anakin belongs on this list, and he'll take the 7th spot. And for those final 6 members of the worst Jedi Order of the list, we'll be going right back to those more obscure characters you'll only find in the books and comics that most of you have probably never heard of. And for the 6th spot, I'm giving this to Joruus C'baoth. Check it, 2U's. Including 2U's Jorus, the clone of Jedi Master Single U Jorus, will probably not be a popular choice, namely for the fact that he technically isn't a Jedi, as the Jedi Order wasn't even aware he existed. Moving back into the Legends continuity for this guy, Joruus C'baoth was, like I mentioned before, a clone made out of DNA of the Jedi Master Jorus C'baoth. For those not aware of the weird U stuff I'm doing here, Jorus II first appeared in the Legends Thrawn trilogy, which was written a few years before the prequels came out. Because the prequels hadn't come out, no one actually knew what the Clone Wars were or how they played out, not even internally in Lucasfilm, leading to authors like Timothy Zahn just assuming based on the limited knowledge they were given, and most of the time, they were wrong. The Thrawn trilogy makes a lot of incorrect assumptions about the Clone Wars, but the only one you need to know for this right now is that Zahn canonized that when you clone another person, the way you name the clone and tell the difference between them and their host is to just give the clone their host's name, identically, save for adding one extra vowel into their name. Hence we have original 1U, Joruus C'baoth, and clone W, Joruus C'baoth. Just to keep things simple and less wordy, I'm only going to be referring to the clone from now on. Speaking of that clone, Jorus was created from a Sparty cloning cylinder, a machine able to quickly create a clone and give the clone the host memories quickly, but with the unfortunate side effect that the clone would be born with a disease known as clone madness. This disease would deteriorate the brain of the clone, leading to loss of memory, loss of logic, impatience, and namely, aggression. If you are not with them, you are their enemy. Many clones subjected to this creation process already showed signs of this madness soon after being created, as seen with the army of Galen Merrick clones who attacked him on Kamino. But the longer the process of cloning took, the farther onset of clone madness would be. When Grand Admiral Thrawn discovered Joruus C'baoth for the first time, the oldest he could have possibly been was 36 years old. Although it is probably more likely that he was younger than that, the youngest he could have been was 5, he's been alive for a long time, and the disease has set in far beyond small side effects. Going back in time though, Jorus was created by Palpatine. We're not sure whether that's Supreme Chancellor Palpatine or Emperor Palpatine, but he was created to test Force-sensitive cloning, something Palpatine needed to master in preparation for his backup plan in the case of his death to return and rule the galaxy once more. We don't know a whole lot about what happened to C'baoth after his creation, but we do have this one line from the Dark Empire sourcebook that seems to imply he was some sort of agent of Palpatine, trained in the dark arts and to follow his command. He allowed this Dark Lord to twist his mind, but that's not the important part to remember. Because 5 years after the death of the Emperor, C'baoth was sought out and discovered by Grand Admiral Thrawn, and when Thrawn found him, C'baoth did not remember shit. The only thing C'baoth knew is that he wasn't a clone. He was the original. He was a Jedi Master of the Order, and he planned on continuing that way. He became the very thing he swore to destroy. Despite forgetting all of his old ways and taking on a new life as a Jedi, C'baoth clearly had very little memory of what exactly a Jedi was, or what they did. The first thing we know he did in his life was murder someone known only as the Guardian, who Palpatine had instructed to guard his secret cloning facility, Mount Tantus. C'baoth had conquered the settlement the Guardian proceeded over, which, although doesn't sound all that bad, as we only see C'baoth trying to protect the people there, he gets worse quickly. Thrawn wanted to recruit C'baoth to his campaign to conquer the galaxy by force, and of course, as a Jedi would, C'baoth rejected. But only until Thrawn agreed to assist C'baoth in kidnapping Leia Organa's 2 unborn children to recruit and eventually be a part of C'baoth's Jedi army he planned on using to rule the galaxy by force. I'm starting to sense an odd theme here. Speaking of odd themes, the next time we really get to spend a lot of time with Jorus is on the planet of Jomark, where C'baoth has already taken over the nearby city of Chainu by force, and moved into a location called the High Castle. It is here where he meets Luke Skywalker, who he intends to take on as his apprentice. The only issue with this arrangement is the fact that Luke is completely confused with Jorus' beliefs as to what the Jedi are, which are, as he claims, higher beings above the rest of the regular riffraff of the galaxy who do not need to concern themselves with lesser concepts like the Empire or the New Republic. That the Jedi should be unstoppable and uncontrollable by these lesser beings. He also believed that droids were abominations, and when asked, did not seem to completely remember very important details about his life and refused to talk about it much more than shallow, vague summaries. Jorus chose to provide Luke with a demonstration of what exactly a Jedi should be should look like, choosing to solve an armed and tense dispute between two arguing citizens by choosing that one of the participants was at fault and was required to pay up. When that citizen pulled out a weapon, C'baoth would use Force Lightning to immediately stop them and torture them for some time before stopping, believing that he had quote-unquote learned their lesson and were not permanently harmed. Luke eventually completely abandoned C'baoth, and throughout the war, C'baoth's mental state would continue to deteriorate, until eventually he had attempted to overthrow Thrawn as the leader of the Empire, a plan that might have worked if he had not been confronted and killed by Mara Jade. C'baoth, as you can probably tell, is on this list because he has no idea what it means to be a Jedi. He's a warmonger, someone who desired to kidnap children and to recruit them as child soldiers. He has a god complex, and stands for almost nothing the Jedi Order stood for. The only reason why he's so low on this list, in spite of that huge list of crimes and traits against him, is due to this one line from Dark Forces Rising, where Luke tells R2-D2 that unlike Vader and Palpatine, C'baoth had no quote-unquote evil aura that he could sense. Despite being a former member of Palpatine's Dark Jedi, despite continuing to use the dark side throughout his life, despite actively collaborating with the Empire and torturing civilians, it didn't seem like C'baoth had any ill intentions with all of this. To me, he seemed like he believed that this is just what it meant to be a Jedi. That he was helping the people of the galaxy. Unlike Anakin or Iskat or Sol, most of the others on this list, he thought he was doing the right thing, that was just how the world worked. And unlike everyone else on this list, he has a pretty major excuse to get him out of these actions. His brain is literally rotting inside of his skull and turning to mush. He was mentally unwell, losing himself, and was one of the most powerful beings alive. Still, in the end, a horrible Jedi. The Order never would have allowed him to practice under their supervision, but one with a medical condition to sorta absolve him, if only just for a little bit. Now we're here. The final 5. After an hour and however long it's been, a long damn time, the 5 worst Jedi of the Order. And first, just to keep things interesting, I'm gonna mostly skip over 5 through 2. If you're familiar enough with the franchise, you probably know who I'm talking about at this point. From 5 to 2, they are Xamar, Raana, Q-Anilia, and Feln. 4 of the 5 members of the First Watch Circle of the Jedi Covenant. Each of these Jedi have their own problems, and plenty of reason to be on this list, but I've decided to not really get into the specifics of most of them, because the main reason why I've chosen to talk about these 4 is the fact that they're all mostly responsible for the same major crimes against what the Order stands for, and most of these crimes were led by the same man, the right hand of the Jedi Covenant, and the #1 worst Jedi of the Jedi Order, Lucien Draay. Now I know 99% of you have no idea who that is, so for the final time in this long-ass video, let's break it down. Moving back to 4,000 years before the films, a little bit before Revan waged war against the Mandalorians, the Republic was suffering through an invasion led by the Sith. 2 former Jedi, now Sith Lords, Exar Kun and his apprentice Ulic Qel-Droma, who I talked about earlier, were setting fire to the universe and pushing the Republic down, until Ulic's returned to the light and Exar Kun when the Republic discovered his base on Yavin. After a war, a Jedi veteran, Krinda Draay, mourning the loss of her husband, Barriss Draay, who was killed in combat, chose to leave the Jedi Order. Krinda grew obsessed with the idea that the reason why her husband died and why the war was fought was because of a failure of the Jedi, that they did not see into the future, recognized the growing darkness in Exar Kun, and killed him before he even had the possibility of turning to the dark side. Now this would be pretty bad already and probably put her on this list, but like I mentioned at the start, she wasn't a Jedi during this time. She doesn't count. In response to this belief, she would form the Jedi Covenant, an organization of Jedi, made up of Jedi, a part of the main Jedi Order, while also being a splinter group separate from the Order itself. The main goal of the Jedi Covenant was to prevent a new rise of the Sith by any means necessary, with an emphasis on using visions of the future brought on by the Force to prevent the Sith from returning. Although the Jedi Order was unaware of the existence of the Jedi Covenant, many Jedi would send younglings and Padawans to train under Draay, as the mass Jedi casualties suffered in the Great Sith War led to a lack of Jedi available at the temple to teach new students. 36 years after the end of the Great Sith War, this would lead to an extremist, secret, cult-like organization forming within the Jedi just outside of the view of the Order, led by Krinda and the First Watch Circle, a group of 5 Jedi Masters who presided over the Covenant. The members of the First Watch Circle included Xamar, Raana, Q-Anilia, Feln, and the son of Krinda Draay, Lucien Draay. The First Watch Circle would take up residence on the Jedi Temple on Taris, with each member taking on the Padawan of their own. However, on one fateful day, the group would open themselves up to the Force on an asteroid known as the Rogue Moon, where simultaneously their Padawans were finishing up their Jedi trials nearby. The group, all except for Lucien, would experience a vision, later referred to as the Rogue Moon Prophecy, of each of the members of the First Watch Circle being killed by a figure in a red environment suit. The members of the Watch Circle made 2 critical false assumptions about this vision, the first being that the figure in the red suit was a Sith Lord, and second, that although they only viewed their own deaths, that the entire Jedi Order would be destroyed in the future. The one correct assumption about the vision was that the figure in the red environment suit was one of the 5 figures wearing red environment suits near them, their Padawans, and that one of them, if not all of them, would be responsible for their deaths. Excluding Xamar, the only member to question the Watch Circle's decision, and the reason why he ranks last among them, the course of action they chose to make was swift and near unanimous. The Watch Circle would murder every single one of their Padawans to preserve the future of the Jedi Order, without talking to their Padawans, without questioning their potential motive or how they might have come to hold such disdain over their masters that they would kill them, without questioning the fact that each of their Padawans were each devout followers of the light who showed no sign of moving towards the dark side. On the night of their knighting ceremony in the Jedi Temple on Taris, the Covenant would murder each of their Padawans, all except for one, Lucien's Padawan, Zane Carrick. Carrick had arrived late to the ceremony, observed the murders just after the 4 had been killed, and ran off. As he ran, the Covenant would frame Carrick for the killings of the so-called Taris 4 in an event known as the Padawan Massacre. The comic Knights of the Old Republic follows Zane running from the Covenant, and as most of this is revealed in the 1st and 5th issue in the 50-issue series, I just like to time to say before I continue that Knights of the Old Republic is one of the best comics in the series, and I would highly recommend you all read it before I get into more spoilery territory. I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, everyone left who wanted to? Good. Continuing on, Zane would slowly discover worse and worse things about the members of the Jedi Covenant in his journey to escape them. Like Raana being called Runaway due to her violently aggressive behavior and headstrong decisions that made her an unpredictable and horrifying foe whose emotions led her to draw on the dark side. Or Feln exploiting his people's culture to get what he wanted, and physically beating Zane out of revenge. None of the members of the Covenant had acted anything like Jedi, despite claiming and genuinely believing to be the same. But like I mentioned before, the worst among them, and the one leading the entire operation, was Zane's master, Lucien, who the comic spares no punches in making him by far the worst Jedi of the Order ever seen by a long shot. Just to name a few of his crimes: first-degree murder, attempted murder, framing someone for murder, openly just hating his Padawan for years. That's not a crime, but fuck you for that. second-degree murder, attempted murder again, lying to the Jedi Council, attempted murder again, considering murder, exploiting his wealth and his framed murder to get a seat on the Jedi Council, ordering the destruction of a cultural heritage sites to cover up a Jedi storeroom, asking a woman serving him to take sedatives so that she wouldn't question him, joking out his allies, denying Q-Anelia from visiting a woman she saw as a mother, and, worst of all among them, had willingly assisted in the final end goal plan of the Jedi Covenant, an organization that had secretly been under the control of a Sith acolyte from the beginning, and allowing the Covenant to attempt to usurp the entire Jedi Order with an acolyte known as Hazen as its head. Draay had almost completed a full embrace to the dark side, attacking his former apprentice yet again, taking on a new red blade, and almost accepting apprenticeship under the Sith Hazen. But after the death of his mother in his arms, who chastised him for the Padawan massacre, and died with her final words being for Lucien to face the future with humility, he rejected the dark side. When Hazen made him choose between him and Zane, he chose Zane. Because only a Sith deals in absolutes. He did what he must, and using Hazen's own weapon against him, he killed him, defeating the Jedi Covenant. After the battle, Lucien would form his own Jedi Covenant, focusing on changing the future on a personal level, rather than attempting to change the future of others, inspiring change in a new generation of Jedi with a message of hope, unlike his mother's message of fear. And they all lived happily ever. Okay, but all that shit was still insane, right? Like, I can't just let him off the hook for all of that. He killed so many people. The number one worst Jedi, obviously. Like, without question, he is the worst. No redemption for you, dude. Your anger and your lust for power. God